Have you ever seen a dog stop so suddenly it's like time itself forgot to move? Officer Ethan Carter had watched Shadow charge through fire drills, leap over barricades, even track fugitives on storm-soaked nights. But never like this. One moment, they were weaving through the polished halls of Rivergate Mall, just another friendly patrol, nodding at holiday shoppers. And the next, Shadow, a 5-year-old German shepherd with eyes sharp as winter sunlight, froze mid-step. His hackles bristled. A low warning rumbled in his chest. Ethan followed the dog's gaze and saw nothing unusual. Just sales racks, a teenager juggling shopping bags, an old man in a Seahawks cap buying coffee. Then, by the entrance to the toy store, a man. Average build, maybe late 30s, baseball cap pulled low, green work jacket. And in his arms, a tiny girl in a pink puffer coat, face hidden against his shoulder. Winter in Portland, Oregon, was always a delicate paradox, gray skies promising rain that only half kept their word, air rich with the brine of the Willamette River and the faint bite of salt and pine drifting from the distant Cascades. On this particular Thursday afternoon, the city's Pearl District bustled with a contented urban hush. Office workers with their coffee cups, college students lounging on the grass beside the outdoor sculptures. Children pressed their faces against glass bakery windows, waiting for their parents to buy the last raspberry Danish. Christmas lights dangled, half-hearted and early, from lampposts, reflecting in scattered puddles on the broad, clean sidewalks. Officer Ethan Carter moved through it all with the easy stride of a man both vigilant and comfortable in his place. Ethan, 28, was tall but lean from long patrol shifts and early morning runs along the river. His dark hair was cut short, regulation, but never quite neat, framing a face that looked too young for the tired seriousness in his eyes. Most called him a good guy, and he was. Generous with neighbors, quietly protective of strangers, and a touch shy when off duty. That shyness, though, never dulled his professional instincts, which were sharp as the chill in the December air. His partner drew even more attention, a large, striking German shepherd who moved with a coiled, watchful energy that seemed almost too focused for an animal. Shadow, at 5 years old, was already a legend in the K9 unit, not for feats of aggression, but for his uncanny, almost empathic ability to sense distress. Shadow's coat was a deep black with streaks of burnished tan along his legs, chest, and a distinctive silver blaze running from his right ear to his shoulder. His ears were perfectly pointed, except for a small notch in the left, a souvenir from an encounter with a frightened stray on his very first call. Most dogs barked or pulled against the leash out of excitement. Shadow's reactions were different. He would stop, freeze, and lower his head, eyes locked and amber bright, as if he saw through people to their private storms. Ethan always said, half-jokingly, that Shadow could sense the places where people's lives had frayed or where something important was about to happen. But the origin of Shadow's name was not so casual. 3 winters ago, on a midnight shift, Ethan had answered a call at a Riverside warehouse reports of a missing child. It was Shadow, then just a rookie, who found the girl, huddled behind an abandoned crate, trembling in a patch of darkness, silent with shock. When Ethan knelt beside her, the girl had looked not at him, but at the dog, and whispered, "He came out of the shadows to find me." The name stuck. Shadow, the dog who moved through darkness to bring people back to the light. They made an odd pair, these two, the quietly observant young cop and the dog whose patience and presence seemed at times nearly supernatural. The community knew them well, especially in the Pearl District, where routine patrols doubled as gentle reassurance. Shopkeepers would wave. Children would ask if Shadow could do a trick, and Ethan, always happy to oblige, would let the dog show off his perfectly trained sit or a gentle nose-to-hand greeting. This afternoon's patrol was supposed to be uneventful. But in cities, peace is a thin film, easily disturbed. Inside the Rivergate Mall, a modern glass and steel sprawl alive with the din of late shoppers and the smell of soft pretzels, Ethan and Shadow moved among the crowd. Ethan's gaze was relaxed, but Shadow was on alert, nose twitching at scents only he could truly decipher. A new figure entered the story, though at first glance he was nobody special. A man in his late 30s, medium build, dressed in jeans and a forest green work jacket, baseball cap pulled low over short brown hair. He walked quickly but not hurriedly, except for the way he kept glancing over his shoulder, checking his reflection in the dark windows, squeezing the hand of a small girl with such tension that her sleeve bunched up nearly to the elbow. The little girl, maybe 3, maybe 4, was tiny, with a shock of strawberry blonde curls and pale, freckled skin. She wore a pink puffer coat with one mitten missing, and looked up at her companion not with affection, but with silent, searching eyes. She did not cry, did not fuss, but pressed close to the man's leg, letting herself be led with the wary stiffness of a child accustomed to uncertainty. Shadow's reaction was immediate and absolute. He froze mid-stride, hackles bristling, his body a taut line of attention pointed directly at the pair. Ethan, recognizing the shift, followed the dog's gaze. The man and girl were just outside the entrance to Sunrise Toys, the city's busiest toy store, lost among families and laughter. For a split second, the world seemed to freeze. Ethan's training had taught him to trust his instincts, but he trusted Shadow's even more. The mall's background noise, the soft music, the buzz of conversation, the clatter of shoes on tile fell away. Shadow stood rigid, every muscle trembling with intent, eyes blazing with an ancient warning. The man holding the little girl caught the shift, his own posture stiffening. His hand, which had gripped the girl's arm, twitched with a sudden urgency. He shifted his weight, eyes darting around as if searching for exits, calculations flickering behind a practiced mask of casualness. Ethan spoke, calm but firm. "Sir, could I have a word, please?" The man's face pale, with rough stubble and a sharp jawline tightened. For a heartbeat he hesitated, then his body exploded into motion. He shoved past a rack of winter coats, dragging the girl in his wake, nearly knocking over an elderly woman who gasped and shrank away. Shadow responded before Ethan could react, lunging ahead with the coiled power of a wolf, barking sharply, his lead yanked from Ethan's hand. "Shadow, hold!" Ethan commanded, already giving chase, but the order wasn't to stop, only to focus. Shoppers recoiled in surprise, parting like a wave as the trio streaked through the wide corridor, the man dodging, desperate, the girl now stumbling as she struggled to keep up. A security guard, a burly black man in his mid-40s with a badge pinned to his blue jacket, Officer Sam Booker, stepped out from a jewelry kiosk, eyes wide as he clocked the chaos unfolding. Booker was known among mall regulars for his deep, booming laugh and a calm presence in emergencies. He barely hesitated, recognizing Ethan and Shadow, and reached for his radio, voice steady. "We have a runner, southeast wing, near Sunrise Toys. All units respond." The man darted left, toward the food court, where the smell of pizza and cinnamon rolls thickened the air. Ethan shouted, "Let the girl go! Stop now and nobody gets hurt!" But the man only clutched the child tighter. Panic started to ripple outward. People pulled out their phones. A mother scooped up her toddler. A teenager dropped his smoothie, splattering purple across the floor. In the cafe across the street, Mia Lopez had already leapt to her feet, her reporter's instincts kicking in with adrenaline. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the unfolding scene, a wild chase, the black and tan form of Shadow leading the charge, Ethan close behind. Fumbling for her phone, Mia switched from her camera to video, breath quick and shallow. "This is happening right now," she murmured, pressing record, the shaky footage capturing Shadow's urgency, the child's pink coat, the chaos swirling behind them. Customers around her turned to stare, some pressing to the glass, others whispering as the tension spilled out from the mall into the city itself. Back inside, the chase funneled toward the main atrium, a vast glass dome where sunlight angled down, silver bright on the tiles. The man was fast, but not trained, and he made mistakes, hesitating at an escalator, doubling back, nearly colliding with a display of giant teddy bears. Shadow was relentless, never once distracted, his barking echoing off the high ceilings. Ethan felt his own pulse drum in his ears, the city's rhythms now reduced to one urgent thread. They reached the south entrance. The man shoved through the doors, dragging the girl out into the brisk December air. The sky was mottled gray, threatening rain, the scent of damp pine swirling on a sudden gust of wind. For an instant, Ethan feared losing them in the busy parking lot, but Shadow closed the gap, cutting the man off with a snarl that was more warning than threat. Cornered between two parked SUVs, the man spun, eyes wild, and tried to hoist the girl as a shield. Shadow did not hesitate. He circled low, teeth bared, his growl vibrating with warning, every movement calculated and controlled. Ethan drew closer, voice firm but even. "Let her go. You're not going anywhere." The man's gaze darted, sweat beading at his temples. For a long second it seemed he might run again, but Shadow's stance was unyielding, and the girl, sensing a change, pulled away, falling to her knees beside the dog. Ethan moved in, handcuffs at the ready, and with a practiced motion, restrained the man, pressing him gently but firmly to the ground. "You're safe now," Ethan told the girl softly, as she clung to Shadow's thick ruff, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. Mall security and local police arrived moments later, led by Officer Booker. He quickly secured the area, ushering curious bystanders aside. Ethan passed the suspect into custody, then knelt beside the little girl. Up close, she was even smaller than she had seemed. Delicate wrists, a bruise fading to yellow beneath one sleeve, her face smeared with the tracks of recent tears. "Hey," Ethan said gently. "You're going to be okay." "You did nothing wrong." Shadow nuzzled her hand with a soft, comforting whine, his eyes never leaving her face. Meanwhile, Mia was already uploading her video. The footage was raw and unsteady, but powerful. The image of a uniformed officer and his dog sprinting through the mall, a frightened child, the moment of rescue. Within minutes, the video caught fire, racking up shares and comments across Portland's digital landscape. People tagged their friends, local parents debated security, and activists demanded answers about missing children. The story began to spread, not just as a news event, but as a call for awareness, a spark lighting old fears in the city's collective memory. Back at the mall, Officer Booker helped clear a path as paramedics arrived to check the girl, her name still unknown. The suspect, cuffed and sullen, stared blankly at the crowd, refusing to answer questions. A tall, silver-haired woman in her late 50s, Dr. Janice Webb, the on-call trauma counselor for the precinct, arrived with her usual calm efficiency. She wore a navy pea coat and soft wool scarf, her gentle voice steady as she knelt by the girl, asking simple questions, checking for signs of shock. Dr. Webb was well respected, known for her compassion and the quiet strength she brought to every crisis, traits shaped by years working in war zones before returning to her hometown. Mia, finally making her way inside, managed to snap a few more photos of Shadow as the dog sat, regal and protective, beside the rescued girl. She noticed the girl's grip on the dog, the way her fear eased with each quiet breath. When a reporter from a local TV crew tried to shove a microphone close, Shadow growled softly, and the reporter wisely stepped back. Ethan, after giving his statement to Officer Booker, found himself surrounded by grateful shoppers. A young boy, barely 10, ran up and hugged Shadow, whispering, "You're a hero." Ethan ruffled the boy's hair, the strain of the chase fading just a little. He glanced at Mia, who offered a thumbs up, her face alive with excitement and relief. As police escorted the suspect away, rain finally began to fall, soft and misty, blurring the bright Christmas lights reflected in every puddle. Shadow shook the water from his coat, ears pricked for Ethan's next command. The rescued girl, now wrapped in a police blanket, finally looked up and, for the first time, managed a tiny, grateful smile. That evening, as Ethan filed his report, Mia's video continued to circulate. The city's attention was captured, not just by the crime, but by the swift, instinctive teamwork of a man and his dog, and the undeniable power of a community watching out for its children. The case was only beginning, but for one small girl, safety had returned, carried on the strong shoulders of an officer and the loyal heart of a dog named Shadow. The rain had become a steady curtain over Portland, drumming softly against the windows of the precinct as night pressed in. The Rivergate Mall incident was still buzzing across the city, with news crews circling and social media alight with theories and concern. But inside the quiet halls of Central Precinct, time seemed to slow, details sharpening in the cool fluorescent light. Ethan Carter sat across from the suspect in interview room 3, a windowless, claustrophobic box with dull gray walls and a battered table. The man was handcuffed, eyes rimmed red, his work jacket now wrinkled and damp. He had an ordinary look, brown hair matted to his forehead, a thin line of sweat on his brow, faded tattoos snaking up one arm, but there was a hollowness in his stare, as if exhaustion and secrecy were twin burdens he'd carried for years. "Name?" Ethan asked, voice steady but not unkind. The man paused, then replied with flat insistence, "Richard Weller." It was the third name he'd given in as many hours. Detective Lynn Tran, Ethan's supervisor, entered quietly. She was a small Vietnamese-American woman in her 40s, with sharp features softened only by her warm, reassuring eyes. Her reputation for reading suspects was well earned. She had a gentle presence, but the mind of a chess master, always 3 moves ahead. She nodded to Ethan and sat opposite the man, hands folded, notepad ready. "Richard, do you have any ID?" she asked. He shook his head. "Lost my wallet." Tran's tone remained friendly but firm. "Who is the girl?" "My niece. Her mom's sick. I was picking her up from daycare." "Which daycare?" The man hesitated, stammering before muttering a name that turned out to be for a business that had closed years ago. Lynn exchanged a glance with Ethan. The lies were obvious, but the man's nerves were real. They pressed on, circling through questions, looking for a crack. The suspect's evasions grew more tangled, each answer less convincing. Meanwhile, the rescued girl now called Jane Doe sat in the break room wrapped in a navy blanket, clutching a juice box with both hands. "A social worker, miss." Clara Reynolds had arrived, an older black woman with kind, lined hands, silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. Clara's soothing voice and patient eyes calmed even the most distressed children. Her decades of service left her with an instinct for knowing what frightened kids needed most. She offered the girl gentle conversation, a soft plush toy, but the child remained silent, her big blue eyes fixed on the window, lost and withdrawn. Shadow, lying quietly beside her, rested his chin on his paws, occasionally nosing the girl's leg with careful affection. Clara watched the two with a hint of a smile. She believed in animal magic, and Shadow seemed to work wonders other adults could not. When Ethan finished his round of questioning, he checked the evidence. The man's green work jacket was already sealed in a plastic bag. As Ethan inspected it, something strange caught his eye. There was a faint, sweet, chemical odor on the sleeve, masked beneath the lingering scent of rain and sweat. He carefully held the material close, then called for a field test. The tech, a young Latina named Rosa Garcia Short, broad-shouldered, with a lightning-fast wit and a nervous habit of tapping her badge, ran the tests efficiently. "It's animal tranquilizer," she confirmed, holding up the readout. "Ketamine, mixed with something else. Not the kind you find in a vet's office." Ethan felt a chill. Shadow had known his agitation in the mall, the way he'd reacted to the jacket and not just the man. Tran said quietly, "This wasn't an accident." He was prepared for more than shopping. As detectives worked the case, news continued to ripple across the city. In a dimly lit apartment above Burnside, Mia Lopez sat hunched over her battered laptop. Her earlier video had made the rounds. Now she found herself both elated and unsettled by the sudden attention. She brushed a damp strand of hair from her eyes, scrolling through the hundreds of comments and shares. She decided to dig deeper. That evening, Mia visited the home of Ann Wilkins, a single mother with tired eyes and a soft southern accent whose 8-year-old son had gone missing the year before. Ann, slim and tall, wore a faded blue cardigan and held a worn photograph of her boy. She told Mia her story with quiet dignity, describing the day her son vanished from a playground and the fruitless efforts to find him. "They said he ran away," Ann murmured, "but I know my boy. He was waiting for me." Something happened. The story struck Mia. There were echoes of other families she'd read about, stories buried under newer tragedies. Over the next 2 days, Mia met with more parents. A couple from East Portland who'd lost their twin girls during a custody battle, a retired dock worker whose granddaughter had been taken by a family acquaintance. All different neighborhoods, all different stories, but with a pattern. Most of the children had vanished in broad daylight, with police reports ending in dead ends or bureaucratic confusion. Mia's notebook filled with details, mismatched timelines, strange phone calls, witnesses who later recanted. The more she looked, the clearer the pattern became. Sometimes, the children had briefly reappeared, seen in a distant city, described by a stranger in a bus station, only to disappear again before anyone could intervene. Her heart pounded as she scribbled connections in red ink. It was more than a string of bad luck. Mia knew she was onto something, and her sense of responsibility grew heavier with every new page. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, Shadow continued to sit by the rescued girl. Detective Tran and Ethan watched through the glass, noting how the girl relaxed when the dog was near, even if she wouldn't speak. Clara murmured, "Animals know what we forget, how to be present, how to be safe." Rosa finished logging the chemical analysis, then told Ethan, "If that jacket was meant to drug a child, there's no telling how many more have been taken before." Tran nodded, "And no telling where they are now." As midnight crept in, the city was restless, its wounds old and new laid bare by the bright glare of news and the dark ache of unanswered questions. Mia closed her laptop, exhausted but determined, her mind racing with the faces and stories of the missing. In the break room, the girl finally reached out a hand, timidly stroking Shadow's fur. The dog thumped his tail, his warm eyes gentle. For the first time, the smallest hint of hope flickered in her expression, a fragile light, defiant in the face of so much darkness. The night rain finally eased, but a pale morning fog hung low over Portland, casting the city in a soft, uneasy silence. At Central Precinct, the evidence room was a clutter of sealed bags and files, fluorescent lights glaring off the white walls. Ethan Carter, bleary-eyed from little sleep, stood with Detective Lynn Tran and the evidence tech Rosa Garcia. The green work jacket from the suspect lay flat on the table between them, already tainted with the chemical tang of animal tranquilizer. But there was something else, a subtle thickness in the jacket's inner lining, a crinkling when Ethan pressed the fabric between his fingers. Rosa, always curious, fetched a seam ripper. Ethan slid on gloves and carefully worked at the stitches, his breath held. When the seam parted, a folded, stained piece of paper slid out, a map, drawn shakily in blue ink, marked with cryptic notes and a bold red X northeast of the city. Tran leaned in, tracing the lines with her pen. "That's Forest Hollow," she murmured, pointing to a stretch of woodlands just north of Portland, where old logging roads twisted through mossy evergreens and sunlight rarely touched the ground. "Nobody goes out there unless they have a reason," Ethan's pulse quickened. "If there are kids out there, we can't wait." Tran nodded, her face shadowed by the weight of what they might find. As Ethan prepared for the search, he knelt by Shadow, rubbing the dog's ears. The German shepherd, restless and alert, whined softly, already sensing that the day's work was far from over. Shadow's fur was still damp from the night before, his eyes luminous in the half-light, every muscle tense with purpose. Meanwhile, in a sunny co-working space off Alberta Street, Mia Lopez was already at work. Her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, eyes ringed with fatigue, she sat with a laptop open and her phone buzzing on silent. The video of Shadow's rescue had brought her dozens of emails, some from anxious parents, others from concerned citizens. Mia's journalism had always been driven by a stubborn sense of justice, but now, fueled by what she'd seen, she needed help. She called on her friend Benny Tran, a short, cheerful software engineer in his late 20s, who wore colorful socks and always smiled with half his face. Benny had a talent for organizing online communities. Together, they quickly put together a campaign, Bring Back Childhood Smiles, inviting Portlanders to share stories, photos, and leads on missing children. Soon, a handful of college students joined them. Maria Esquivel, a tall, athletic woman with a passion for youth outreach, and siblings Jamie and Ellis Harper, both pale and wiry, known for their tireless work at food banks and shelters. Maria brought a steadiness to the group. Jamie was methodical, Ellis inventive, both driven by a sense that the world should be safer than it is. Mia's network grew fast, her group's posts filling social feeds with pictures of missing children and reminders of the city's duty to protect its own. As community tips poured in, she and Benny sorted them, cross-checking for patterns, connecting families who had once felt invisible. Back at the precinct, Ethan and Tran conferred with the captain, an older man named Charles Rivers, whose silver hair and burly frame hid a weary but compassionate soul. Captain Rivers trusted Ethan's instincts and authorized a team for the forest search. By noon, Ethan, Shadow, and a pair of uniformed officers, Officer Donna Kim, a Korean-American woman with a runner's build and a dry sense of humor, and Officer Pete Mallory, a red-haired veteran with an easy grin and a skeptical eye, drove north in 2 SUVs, the city falling away behind them. Forest Hollow loomed ahead, its pines shrouded in mist. The forest was a tangled world of shadows, the old road barely visible beneath slick leaves and moss. Pete, with his deep, gravelly voice, cracked jokes about horror movies, but his eyes kept scanning the underbrush. Donna's hands never left her radio, ready for anything. Ethan let Shadow out, the dog's nose twitching as he caught unfamiliar scents. Shadow moved with a low, purposeful lope, pausing every few yards to test the air. The team fanned out, flashlights in hand. An uneasy silence clung to the trees, broken only by the crunch of boots and the occasional cry of a jay. Suddenly, Shadow stopped, ears pricked, tail stiff. He nosed at a patch of ground near a rotting log. Ethan knelt and brushed aside the leaves, finding a child's plastic bracelet bright pink, sticky with mud. "We're close," Tran murmured, heart pounding. They pushed deeper, following faint prints, torn fabric snagged on blackberry vines, the debris of lives uprooted. In a clearing, they found an old camping trailer, its paint faded, windows fogged. Donna approached first, knocking softly, voice calm and clear. No answer. Pete took the rear. Ethan and Shadow stood at the door, Ethan's hand on his holster. He called, "Portland Police." "Anyone inside?" The silence was broken by a child's muffled sob. Ethan's heart dropped. Tran gestured for Shadow. The dog pressed forward, pawing at the door, whining, hackles up. Tran nodded. Pete forced the lock with a crowbar. The door swung open. Inside, 2 children. 1 boy, 1 girl, both no older than 8, crouched in a corner, faces pale, eyes wide with fear. A mess of blankets, canned food, and broken toys littered the cramped space. Ethan crouched low, voice gentle. "It's okay. You're safe now. We're police." Shadow moved in, tail wagging softly, and the girl reached out, burying her face in the dog's fur. Donna wrapped the children in jackets, her usual sarcasm replaced by quiet comfort. Pete radioed for paramedics, his voice shaky with relief. Tran found a cell phone and a tattered notebook, names and numbers scrawled inside, evidence for a larger case. Outside, as medics arrived and the children were carried into warm arms, Ethan knelt by Shadow, voice full of pride. "Good boy." "You did it." Shadow only wagged his tail, as if he'd known all along what they would find in the silent woods. That evening, as news of the rescue spread, Mia's campaign took on new energy. Parents called the hotline, volunteers organized vigils, and the city found hope in the image of a dog leading lost children out of darkness. Mia and her group stayed up late, sorting messages, knowing their work was only just beginning. By the time the sun rose fully over Portland, a thin gold light cut through the fog, painting hope across a city that had held its breath through the long night. Inside Central Precinct, exhaustion mingled with adrenaline coffee cups multiplied on every surface, voices lowered to murmurs of relief and disbelief. The aftermath of the forest raid was a whirlwind. Paramedics hustled rescued children to the hospital, detectives logged evidence, and the city's emergency lines buzzed with new leads and long-held fears finally given voice. Ethan Carter stood in the war room, his uniform wrinkled, brown hair tousled, Shadow pressed faithfully to his side. They were surrounded by the fruits of the team's work, a wall of photos, maps, receipts, and coded notebooks pieced together from the cabin and the suspect's personal effects. Tran led the debrief, her voice as steady as ever, her eyes betraying a deep pride and fatigue. "This is bigger than Portland," she said, drawing a red line across a map tacked to the whiteboard, connecting Oregon with pins in Idaho, Washington, and Northern California. "The evidence is clear, this was a multi-state operation." Next to Tran, Officer Donna Kim and Pete Mallory reviewed a stream of digital files. Donna's quick fingers traced emails, bank records, and chat logs with a precision that belied her weary posture. Pete's easy smile was replaced by a deep, quiet anger. He knew some cases would haunt them for years. Shadow, meanwhile, paced the perimeter, occasionally pressing his nose to the evidence table, circling photos of children, some now safe, others still missing. When Ethan called him over, Shadow sat, head high, as Tran began to explain the next steps. "Based on what we recovered, burner phones, receipts for one-way van rentals, and the tranquilizer supply, we can prove this is organized trafficking. And we know who's running it." Her eyes fixed on the mugshot of a man with cold blue eyes and a narrow, scarred mouth. Victor Harlan, 46, a career criminal known for his charisma and a string of fake identities. Victor was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair prematurely silver, his face marked by years of hard living and harder schemes. He'd grown up in foster care, learning early how to read people, how to manipulate and disappear. His rap sheet covered everything from petty theft to suspected involvement in interstate abductions, but he'd always slipped through legal cracks until now. Donna's research and Mia's campaign provided new evidence, tying Victor to dozens of recent disappearances. Tran directed the team as warrants were issued across 3 states. SWAT moved in on Victor's latest safe house, a crumbling Victorian in Spokane, while local officers rounded up lower-level accomplices. 1. A woman named Terry Whitaker, short and wiry with hawkish features and the haunted look of someone who'd survived too much, broke down in interrogation, providing names and locations in exchange for immunity. Terry, once a social worker herself, had been lured into the network by promises of quick cash, her desperation for her son's medical bills used against her. She sat with Detective Tran, her hands trembling, voice brittle as she explained how she was first approached in a parking lot, then slowly drawn into a world she couldn't escape. Tran listened with quiet patience, recognizing the complicated web of fear, guilt, and exploitation that ran beneath every trafficking case. As the arrests mounted, Ethan, Pete, and Donna coordinated with federal agents. The FBI's Portland office sent Special Agent Mike Hanley, a barrel-chested, methodical man in his 50s with a slow Maine drawl and a reputation for doggedness. Hanley reviewed Tran's evidence, nodding approval. "You all did good work here. Real good." Shadow watched the room from beneath the conference table, amber eyes sharp, his tail thumping each time a name was crossed off the suspect board. Meanwhile, Mia Lopez's efforts rippled outward. Sitting at her favorite booth in Espresso Junction Cafe, she typed late into the night, finishing a 3-part investigative series for the Portland Daily. Her face glowed in the blue light of her screen, dark hair tumbling around her determined expression. The articles didn't just detail the rescue, they dug into the roots of the network, highlighting how missing children cases were too often dismissed, how vigilance from ordinary citizens and the tenacity of police and their canine partners could make all the difference. Mia's words struck a chord, with readers flooding the newspaper with letters of gratitude, calls for reform, and praise for Shadow, now a minor celebrity in the city. Local television soon featured the German Shepherd in a segment called Portland's Guardian, showing clips of Shadow comforting children and reuniting families. For a moment, Ethan was surprised by the attention, unused to the spotlight, but when he saw Shadow's image on the evening news, a rare, genuine smile crossed his face. Captain Rivers, the old-school chief with a bristling white mustache and a habit of pounding his fist for emphasis, called a citywide press conference. In front of cameras, Tran and Ethan stood together, with Shadow sitting at Ethan's feet, tail wagging slowly. Rivers praised the work of the whole team, but made special mention of the dog who followed his nose and his heart into the shadows and brought our children home. In the crowd, volunteers from Mia's campaign cheered, holding up homemade posters drawings of Shadow, hearts, and paw prints, the words "thank you" scrawled in a dozen crayon colors. As the sun set over Portland that evening, the city was changed. Families found new hope, and the police department, once battered by doubt and frustration, stood taller. Mia's last article closed with a quote from Ethan. "Sometimes all it takes is someone who refuses to give up, and a dog who never loses the trail." Shadow, ever humble, curled up at Ethan's feet, content in the knowledge that for now, the darkness had been pushed back, and the city's children could sleep a little safer. By the time the sun rose fully over Portland, a thin gold light cut through the fog, painting hope across a city that had held its breath through the long night. Inside Central Precinct, exhaustion mingled with adrenaline coffee cups multiplied on every surface, voices lowered to murmurs of relief and disbelief. The aftermath of the forest raid was a whirlwind. Paramedics hustled rescued children to the hospital, detectives logged evidence, and the city's emergency lines buzzed with new leads and long-held fears finally given voice. Ethan Carter stood in the war room, his uniform wrinkled, brown hair tousled, Shadow pressed faithfully to his side. They were surrounded by the fruits of the team's work, a wall of photos, maps, receipts, and coded notebooks pieced together from the cabin and the suspect's personal effects. Tran led the debrief, her voice as steady as ever, her eyes betraying a deep pride and fatigue. "This is bigger than Portland," she said, drawing a red line across a map tacked to the whiteboard, connecting Oregon with pins in Idaho, Washington, and Northern California. "The evidence is clear this was a multi-state operation." Next to Tran, Officer Donna Kim and Pete Mallory reviewed a stream of digital files. Donna's quick fingers traced emails, bank records, and chat logs with a precision that belied her weary posture. Pete's easy smile was replaced by a deep, quiet anger. He knew some cases would haunt them for years. Shadow, meanwhile, paced the perimeter, occasionally pressing his nose to the evidence table, circling photos of children, some now safe, others still missing. When Ethan called him over, Shadow sat, head high, as Tran began to explain the next steps. "Based on what we recovered burner phones, receipts for one-way van rentals, and the tranquilizer supply, we can prove this is organized trafficking. And we know who's running it. her eyes fixed on the mugshot of a man with cold blue eyes and a narrow, scarred mouth. Victor Harlan, 46, a career criminal known for his charisma and a string of fake identities. Victor was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair prematurely silver, his face marked by years of hard living and harder schemes. He'd grown up in foster care, learning early how to read people, how to manipulate and disappear. His rap sheet covered everything from petty theft to suspected involvement in interstate abductions, but he'd always slipped through legal cracks until now. Donna's research and Mia's campaign provided new evidence, tying Victor to dozens of recent disappearances. Tran directed the team as warrants were issued across 3 states. SWAT moved in on Victor's latest safe house, a crumbling Victorian in Spokane, while local officers rounded up lower-level accomplices. 1. A woman named Terry Whitaker, short and wiry with hawkish features and the haunted look of someone who'd survived too much, broke down in interrogation, providing names and locations in exchange for immunity. Terry, once a social worker herself, had been lured into the network by promises of quick cash, her desperation for her son's medical bills used against her. She sat with Detective Tran, her hands trembling, voice brittle as she explained how she was first approached in a parking lot, then slowly drawn into a world she couldn't escape. Tran listened with quiet patience, recognizing the complicated web of fear, guilt, and exploitation that ran beneath every trafficking case. As the arrests mounted, Ethan, Pete, and Donna coordinated with federal agents. The FBI's Portland office sent Special Agent Mike Hanley, a barrel-chested, methodical man in his 50s with a slow Maine drawl and a reputation for doggedness. Hanley reviewed Tran's evidence, nodding approval. "You all did good work here, real good." Shadow watched the room from beneath the conference table, amber eyes sharp, his tail thumping each time a name was crossed off the suspect board. Meanwhile, Mia Lopez's efforts rippled outward. Sitting at her favorite booth in Espresso Junction Cafe, she typed late into the night, finishing a 3-part investigative series for the Portland Daily. Her face glowed in the blue light of her screen, dark hair tumbling around her determined expression. The articles didn't just detail the rescue, they dug into the roots of the network, highlighting how missing children cases were too often dismissed, how vigilance from ordinary citizens and the tenacity of police and their canine partners could make all the difference. Mia's words struck a chord, with readers flooding the newspaper with letters of gratitude, calls for reform, and praise for Shadow, now a minor celebrity in the city. Local television soon featured the German Shepherd in a segment called Portland's Guardian, showing clips of Shadow comforting children and reuniting families. For a moment, Ethan was surprised by the attention, unused to the spotlight. But when he saw Shadow's image on the evening news, a rare, genuine smile crossed his face. Captain Rivers, the old-school chief with a bristling white mustache and a habit of pounding his fist for emphasis, called a citywide press conference. In front of cameras, Tran and Ethan stood together, with Shadow sitting at Ethan's feet, tail wagging slowly. Rivers praised the work of the whole team, but made special mention of the dog who followed his nose and his heart into the shadows and brought our children home. In the crowd, volunteers from Mia's campaign cheered, holding up homemade posters drawings of Shadow, hearts, and paw prints, the words "Thank you" scrawled in a dozen crayon colors. As the sun set over Portland that evening, the city was changed. Families found new hope, and the police department, once battered by doubt and frustration, stood taller. Mia's last article closed with a quote from Ethan. "Sometimes, all it takes is someone who refuses to give up, and a dog who never loses the trail." Shadow, ever humble, curled up at Ethan's feet, content in the knowledge that for now, the darkness had been pushed back, and the city's children could sleep a little safer. The early spring air in Portland felt fresh and light, as if the city itself was exhaling after months of tension and fear. Cherry trees had begun to blossom along the riverside parks, their delicate pink petals fluttering onto the sidewalks and drifting across police car windshields. Inside Central Precinct, the mood had changed. What had once been an atmosphere of relentless worry was now filled with cautious optimism and the sweet, rare taste of victory. Ethan Carter stood by the front desk, looking less worn than he had in months. His Navy uniform, pressed and new, suited his promotion. Detective Ethan Carter, his badge now gleaming beside a freshly embroidered patch. He was taller than most, athletic from years of running with Shadow, and had finally allowed himself a rare, unguarded smile. Shadow, the German shepherd, was at his side as always. The dog's fur shone with new health, his gait confident, tail held high. He wore a new harness black leather trimmed in gold its front, adorned with a circular brass medallion, a city honor for bravery and service. Shadow was older now, with silver threading through the black around his muzzle and a deep, wise patience in his eyes. Reporters lingered on the precinct steps, their cameras aimed not just at the officers, but at the children and families now arriving for reunions. The scenes were both joyful and bittersweet. Among them was little Ava, the strawberry blonde girl who had once clung to silence and fear. Now, dressed in a yellow sundress, she ran into her grandmother's arms, laughter bursting free for the first time since her ordeal. Her grandmother, Margaret, a stout woman with a gentle, creased face and hands roughened by years of gardening, could barely contain her tears, her gratitude pouring out in trembling embraces and whispered thanks. Another boy, Darius, dark-skinned with deep brown eyes and a missing front tooth, clung to his mother, a tall nurse named Tamika who had never given up hope. All across the precinct, scenes like these played out, the sharp pain of loss easing with every hug, every tear, every word of comfort. In the crowd, Clara Reynolds, the veteran social worker, offered gentle support, her silver hair catching the sun, her calm voice guiding overwhelmed families. She moved with practiced care, a pillar of steadiness for both children and adults. Meanwhile, Pete Mallory and Donna Kim, still in their uniforms, watched with relief, joking quietly but unable to hide their own pride in what the department had accomplished. Pete's ginger beard was neater these days, Donna's eyes a little brighter. Tran, Ethan's mentor, hovered at the periphery, her sharp gaze softened by satisfaction. She paused to kneel beside Shadow, scratching the dog behind the ears. "You saved more than children, you know," she murmured. "You reminded this city what hope looks like." Shadow licked her hand, then looked up at Ethan, eyes gleaming with something that seemed almost like a smile. In a small room off the main hallway, city leaders had gathered for the formal awards ceremony. Captain Rivers, still bluff and bristling, his mustache impossible to tame, stood behind the podium. His speech was gruff but heartfelt, and when he spoke of Shadow's unwavering courage, loyalty, and heart, there were few dry eyes. The crowd erupted in applause as Rivers pinned the medal to Shadow's harness, and the German shepherd for once seemed to bask in the attention. Later, in a sunlit courtyard behind the station, the children who'd been rescued played together under the careful watch of their families and volunteers. Ethan leaned on the fence beside Mia Lopez, her notebook tucked away for once. Mia's hair was loose, her face soft with the glow of accomplishment. Since the investigation, her name had become synonymous with courage and relentless truth-seeking. But today she was simply present, her laughter easy, her warmth genuine. She turned to Ethan, nudging him lightly. "You realize you're famous now, right?" Ethan grinned, embarrassment coloring his cheeks. "I think Shadow's the real celebrity." "Did you see those posters?" Mia laughed, pointing out a group of school children waving homemade banners. "Thank you, Shadow," painted in rainbow colors. "He's going to need a security detail." For a long moment they watched the children, silent in shared gratitude. Ethan cleared his throat. "I've been thinking. All those families we met, the ones still searching or still struggling. We should do something." Mia's eyes lit with purpose. "We start a fund. For counseling, legal support, medical care, whatever they need." Ethan nodded. "And we name it for him. Shadow's Hope." That afternoon they gathered friends and colleagues, Tran, Donna, Pete, Clara, Benny, Maria, Jamie, Ellis, and others from the volunteer network. Ideas spilled out. Community awareness days, emergency support hotlines, therapy dogs for at-risk youth. Shadow, sensing the mood, trotted between the groups, accepting gentle pats, nuzzling children, and pausing beside those who needed comfort most. When the press asked about the fund, Mia gave the first statement. Shadow's Hope is about second chances, about never giving up on a lost child, and about what can happen when a community comes together with love and a little bit of courage. The next morning, Mia's story appeared on the front page of the Portland Daily. From darkness to light, how a city, a detective, and a dog brought our children home. The photo showed Ethan and Shadow in the crowd of families. The dog's head bowed as if in humble acknowledgement of all the trust placed in him. As spring deepened, the effects of the case continued to ripple outwards. More families came forward, old cases were reopened, and Portland's police force recommitted to making the city safer for its youngest citizens. Shadow, metal glinting in the sun, led Ethan through the city on patrol this time not just as a K-9 officer, but as a symbol of hope for all who needed it. In the end, the headlines faded, but the new connections endured. A detective and a reporter, united by compassion, a city renewed by courage, and a dog whose instincts and loyalty lit the way home for countless children. Portland wore its summer like a blessing. The city shimmered in golden light, its riverside parks and bustling plazas alive with children's laughter, music, and the smell of fresh food from street vendors. Flower baskets spilled over with color at every lamppost. The Willamette River sparkled as families picnicked on its green banks. For the first time in months, the atmosphere was gentle, as if the city itself had found peace. Shadow, now celebrated as the city's hero, walked with a quiet dignity that made strangers smile. His fur, once coarse from long days and cold nights, now gleamed in the sun. Every few steps, children would run up, shy at first, then bold, to pat his head or throw their arms around his strong neck. He accepted every touch with calm and patience, amber eyes gentle, tail thumping with measured pride. Parents would lean in to thank Ethan, or sometimes just to watch as their child found courage in the presence of the dog who had become legend. Ethan Carter, for his part, had changed too. Still tall and athletic, with dark hair and a face marked by a seriousness beyond his years, there was now a warmth to his gaze and a sense of rest he had never known before. His uniform was retired for the day, replaced by jeans and a soft gray tee, a battered police ball cap in his hand. He let himself enjoy the simple walk, his hand occasionally resting on Shadow's back, both of them at ease. They strolled along the riverbank, passing groups of families and volunteers setting up for a summer fair. Nearby, Mia Lopez watched over her newly adopted daughter, a small girl with tangled brown hair and searching green eyes. The child Emma, as Mia called her now, was once one of the many rescued, a quiet soul who had spoken little but watched everything. Mia, once a reporter defined by grit and restlessness, had softened in ways she never expected. Her posture remained confident, but her laugh came easier, her face brighter. Today she wore a light blue sundress, her hair loose in the breeze. She knelt to help Emma with her shoes, then stood, waving as Ethan and Shadow approached. "Hey there, heroes," Mia called, her voice teasing and warm. Emma clung to her side, peering up at Ethan with a wary smile. "Emma, you remember Detective Carter and Shadow?" Mia coaxed gently. Emma nodded, her shyness receding as Shadow lowered his head for a nuzzle. The child's small hand disappeared into Shadow's thick fur. A moment later, Emma giggled her first real, unguarded laugh since the rescue, and the sound drew smiles from those nearby. Pete Mallory and Donna Kim arrived, arms full of balloons and banners for the fair. Pete, red-haired and broad-shouldered, grinned at the sight of Emma and Shadow. "You know, I think he's more famous than all of us combined," Pete joked, shaking his head. Donna, her black hair pulled back in a tidy braid, nodded. "He's earned it. But I'm glad he doesn't mind sharing the spotlight with the kids." Nearby, Maria Esquivel, ever the steady organizer, directed volunteers with a clap of her hands. She paused to chat with Clara Reynolds, the wise social worker whose patience and open heart had guided so many families through the aftermath. Clara was gentle as always, helping set up a quiet reading corner beneath a shade tree for any children who felt overwhelmed. The afternoon drifted by with the slow sweetness of summer. Families gathered for group photos with Shadow, who wore his medal proudly on a new red bandana. Children drew pictures of the rescue, tracing Shadow's shape in bold crayon, and hung them on the fence beside the playground. There was singing, the cheerful chaos of sack races, the aroma of roasted corn and lemonade. As dusk settled, the fair wound down and the riverside glowed with lanterns strung between trees. Ethan, Shadow, Mia, and Emma wandered to a quieter spot by the water. They sat on a grassy slope, the river's surface shimmering with the colors of the setting sun. Emma lay against Mia, eyelids heavy, content. Ethan stretched out beside Shadow, who rolled over for a well-deserved belly rub. Mia looked out at the city, her heart full. "Sometimes I think about everything that had to happen to bring us all here," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "It's like the whole city decided not to give up." Shadow lifted his head, gazing at the water and the children playing on the banks, their laughter bright and unafraid. For a long moment, the world was only the river, the breeze, the low murmur of happy voices. Then Emma sat up, reached for Shadow, and whispered, "Thank you, hero dog." Mia squeezed her daughter's hand, tears bright in her eyes. In the distance, Captain Rivers, white-haired, upright, a little less intimidating without his uniform, raised a hand in greeting as he strolled past with his grandkids. Tran lingered by the edge of the fair, her keen eyes soft, pride and contentment etched on her face. Maria, Benny, Jamie, and Ellis clustered nearby, their arms linked, watching as the city they loved finally rested. Shadow, the city's guardian, lay content, ears flicking at the sounds of life all around him. His journey had begun in darkness, but tonight, surrounded by love, hope, and the gentle glow of Portland's lights, he was truly home. Ethan scratched behind his ears, voice barely above a whisper. "Ready for one last walk, old friend?" Shadow stood, stretching his legs, and together they wandered along the riverbank, fading into the comfort of a peaceful night. Just a man, his dog, and the city they protected, every footstep echoing the promise of a safer tomorrow. Sometimes, in the darkest moments, when hope seems far away, a miracle finds its way into our lives. A light shines through the shadows. Shadow's story reminds us that love, courage, and faith can turn even the deepest night into morning. Some might say it was just luck, or the work of good people, but others know that sometimes God sends us guardians in the most unexpected forms, maybe even a loyal dog, a gentle neighbor, or the kindness of a stranger. In our own lives, we all face challenges and losses, and there are times when the world feels overwhelming. But like Shadow, we can each make a difference. By caring for those around us, by believing in second chances, and by never giving up, we invite God's miracles into our everyday journey. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone you love. Leave a comment with your thoughts, subscribe for more stories of hope, and let us know where you are watching from. Together we can pray for all children to be safe, for families to be reunited, and for God to bless and protect every viewer who believes in miracles. If you believe in second chances and the power of love, comment Amen to join our prayer. May God bless you and your family always.